Monster Energy. Everybody knows White Monster Zero Ultra. That's the OG. It kicked off this whole zero sugar energy drink thing. But Ultra is a whole lineup now. You've got Strawberry Dreams, Blue Hawaiian, Sunrise, and Vice Guava. And they all bring the Monster Energy punch. So if you've been living in the white can, branch out. Ultra's got a flavor for every vibe. And every single one is zero sugar. Tap the banner to learn more.
Close your eyes, exhale, feel your body relax, and let go of whatever you're carrying today.
Well, I'm letting go of the worry that I wouldn't get my new contacts in time for this class. I got them delivered free from 1-800-CONTACTS. Oh my gosh, they're so fast.
And breathe.
Oh, sorry. I almost couldn't breathe when I saw the discount they gave me on my first order. Oh, sorry. Namaste.
Visit 1-800-CONTACTS.com today to save on your first order.
1-800-CONTACTS.
America leads the world in medicine development. It matters. We get new medicines first, nearly 3 years faster. 5 million Americans go to work because we make medicines here at home. And not relying on other countries keeps us safe. But China is racing to overtake us. Will we let them, or will we choose to stay ahead? When America leads, America cures. Let's tell Washington to keep us in the lead.
Learn how at americacures.com. Paid for by Pharma.
Hello and welcome to the Paddock and the Pavilion for our third and final Cheltenham Festival episode. Today's guest is Richard Pitman. Born in Cheltenham, Richard rode major winners at the festival before going on to spend 37 years with the BBC as one of television's best-known horse racing presenters. Richard joined me to talk about working for legendary Fred Winter, champion jockey turned champion trainer, and why, in Richard's words, he was my hero. Discover what it was like to ride under Winter's guidance, the qualities that made him such a remarkable figure, and how he handled both success and disappointment in the fiercely competitive world of top-level national hunt racing. Richard also shares some wonderful stories in a packed hour-long show from one of Cheltenham's own. So settle in for a fascinating journey into racing history with Richard Pitman and the man who inspired him, Fred Winter. Hello, Richard. Great to see you again on the Paddock and the Pavilion. How are you?
I am absolutely well. I was 83 2 months ago, so that's surpassed my initial idea of how long I'd live. I thought I'd go at 40, so I'm doing well.
I was going to say that it's so long ago since I spoke to you. You were in your 70s when I last spoke to you.
Yeah.
You were 79. But...
Yeah.
Well, in today's episode, we're going to talk about someone you knew very well, a Cheltenham legend, Fred Winter. And I read that he was a boyhood hero of you.
Oh, absolutely. Not only a boyhood, when I started to ride and I went 4 years without a winner, so I was put on the seat near the toilet, Fred Winter was a hero and I loved him. He became an even stronger hero when I went to work for him on the first day that he trained, which was marvelous.
What was it about him that inspired you as a boy?
His strength, and he didn't need to shout. He had steel grey eyes that would wither a candle into fire.
Sounds good. So how did you get a job with Fred Winter?
I asked him for one. As I said, 4 years, no winners, been around small yards. And the talk was that he was going to retire and start training. So I went straight up to him and said, would you consider helping me out of this lowly position in the weighing room and bring me up a bit? And he said, yep, come and join me. 3 of us joined on the first day. His head lad for many, many years, Brian Delaney, was one, and another fellow called Kingy going there like me for rides. But he was pretty adamant. Look, Richard, he said, I will give you rides for 2 reasons. I've watched you slaving around on very bad horses, and horses jump better for you than they do for most people. And also, you're totally honest. Keep those two attributes, and I'll employ you. So we turned up for work, and there were about 6 horses came the first day, and probably 10 by the end of the week. But even when he was first champion trainer, we only had 38 horses in training. You imagine Willie Mullins now 300.
And I read that you and some of the other staff lived in a caravan to start with.
Oh, well, the first day I was given a caravan, he was so apologetic because it was a little towing one, not a live-in caravan. And he said, if you'll come down to the kitchen, you'll be fed. And if you want the loo, you go in the woods.
Bit different from working, as we say, for Willie Mullins, isn't it? There must have been pressure on him, though, having been a great jockey when he started as a trainer.
Yes, but he had some very good contacts. And just thinking back to the caravan situation, when we were full, which were probably 20 stables at the time, instead of building more stables, and he'd been offered more horses, he chose to build us a hostel, because by then, obviously, we had a few more lads. So that is indication of the man. He thought of us, the staff, which in those days, 1964, 65, there weren't many trainers who thought jockeys were anything slightly better than a toad.
So did Uplands, where you were based, did that need a lot of improvement when he first went?
No. Oh, no, it's been a very decent yard for a while. No, it didn't need much improvement, but it needed enlarging, because he was so popular and going to be. He had a winner with his first ever runner, which then won the national, J. Trump. Actually, I say first ever runner. I rode the first ever runner, but mine started 5 minutes before J. Trump at Ludlow, and I'd been unseated at the very first fence. So J. Trump actually was the main first runner and winner. So that struck a great chord.
Yes, a horse called 177 on the 21st of October, 1964.
Oh, well done, you. Good man. When I came back that night, the horse was a mad, hard puller, and only Fred rode him at exercise around the Mandown Gallops at Lambourne. And he said to me, look, you probably won't hold this horse. At the start, and there were quite a few runners, have him facing the wrong way. So they're off, and then you turn round, you see. So that was fine. It worked, except that when he got going, there was no stopping. And I cleaved my way through the 12 or 14 runners, whatever there were. I just spread them out like splinters on a chopping block. And he was going so fast at the first and stretched at it. And I didn't know how to slip reins in those days. And it just pulled me out like a nut out of a catapult.
What was he like then when you did something wrong?
Well, this is quite good. When I got back that night and we discussed it, he said, well, Richard, we all have to learn by our mistakes. You won't be getting another ride for 3 months, and that will be giving you plenty of time to think about yourself and life and riding, which is great, wasn't it? I love that sort of interaction.
So he didn't go for really harsh words, and he went no.
Whether I'm slipping too far ahead, I don't know. But
carry on.
2 photographs from '73 at Cheltenham, Pendle being a short head second in the Gold Cup, which we should have won. And in the winner's enclosure, there is a clear imprint of his hand on the horse's hindquarters, and he's holding me round the shoulder with the other arm. In 1974, we won the champion hurdle on Lanzarote, and we have an identical situation. His handprint on the horse's backside and his arm around me. So, he was the same in victory and defeat.
And as a trainer, you've mentioned it already. He made an immediate impact, winning the Grand National in '65 and '66.
Yeah. Anglo was 66, J Trump in 65. In fact, I'm doing a thing in America on the three American Grand National winners later this month, and looking them up. J Trump, I saw his breeding, and then beside it was Donald Trump had just paid 500,000 for his first racehorse, and it was useless, and he never had another one.
Well, I never thought we'd get Donald Trump on the podcast.
Well, you never know.
And where you were training, Fort Warwin, was next door.
Yeah, it was called Over the Wall. There was a big old sarsen stone wall. Oh, could have been 10 foot high, and Fred had won for Fort Warwin a lot, and he'd even won the Grand Steep to Paris on Mandarin, a horse whose bit broke in his mouth. And the picture of him is with it dangling, as it's broken in the middle, dangling either side of his mouth. And I can remember the race very, very well. Fred Winter's pure body strength in the saddle got it round I think it was at Auteuil. Very, very tricky track can be. And it was just the way that he leant at the right side and gripped with his legs. He maneuvered the horse with his body and then won.
So what was the rivalry like between those two?
Oh, well, pretty sharp to start with. But Fred Winter was quickly coming through the ranks, and they spoke, they got on well. But quite funny thing, when I got going, Fuchs jockey, and I can't remember his name, Barry Brogan, broke an ankle on a Friday, and he said, could I ride, what was it, Charlie Poteen in the Hennessy on the Saturday? And of course, I was delighted to. Anyway, again, a funny horse, runaway horse. And he said, look, you won't hold this, so just sit in front, keep hold of his head. But he is funny. And as he passed the stands with a circuit to go, he dropped the bridle and went, wanted to go into the stables, So I picked up the stick and whacked him. It was like reprimanding a spoiled child, He threw his toys at me, and went, trying desperately to get into the stables. So when I got him round the bend, and I'm 10 lengths clear, at every fence, whichever way I went at it, he would go right. So I'd take him right down the next fence. He'd go left. He was a spoiled child. Anyway, he hung on to win. And Jeff King, who was second on a Verley Buick horse, said, I'm objecting. I said, oh, fine. Yeah. 1, 10 or 12 lengths, I think you'll have a great chance there. What are you objecting for? Obstruction. I said, well, you weren't even near enough for me to hear you, let alone obstruct. He said, no, but it took mine and the horse's eyes every time you were running around. Anyway, he went and objected. They threw him out, you see. And you had to pay a deposit in those days. And it was 250 quid, in the early 70s. And they threw it out straight away, the stewards, and he came storming back in, shouting and roaring at me and about the jockey club and everything else. And in came then the steward secretary, Sir Piers Bengough, who was a major steward later on. And he said, "Oh, Jeff, old boy, I'm sorry about that, but you've been so obnoxious since. You've got to come in." As he left the stewards, he was swearing. You see, you've got to come back in to see the stewards. So they fined him 400 quid for being obnoxious, which is a lesson you learn, isn't it?
He was champion trainer 8 times. The first time in 1970-71, and then we're going to concentrate a lot on 1973. And at the beginning of the 72-73 season, you became the stable jockey at Uplands.
Yep. Eddie Harty had been there, and Paul Kellaway. I'd shared it with Paul, and we were called in by Fred Winter when we rode out first lot. He said, "Boys, I want to see you." after you've done your horse up. Come in separately. Paul, you come in first. So Paul Kellaway, I can you remember, he's been dead a long time now. He had a big crooked jaw, like a fighter. And he came out of the office and he's coming towards me with his big gait on him and his fists clenched. And I thought, he's going to hit me. And I've never had a physical fight in my life. And he's come right close and we're nearly nose to nose. And then he stood back and he's put up his fists. He said, defend yourself. So I don't know how to defend myself. And then he put his fist down and said, there's no justice in this world. I can ride and I've just been sacked. You can only talk and you've kept the job.
I wasn't expecting that to hear how you became a stable jockey at Fred Winter's.
I was there for 7 or 8 years, I suppose, because I've been riding a while, maybe more. Yeah. And a similar thing happened when John Frankham came through the ranks and then shared it with me. And John had taken a while to materialize because he was a show jumper and Fred had to remold him. He was an international champion as a boy on Red Johnny, I remember. Anyway, Fred had to remold him totally. But when John came in from school, he didn't know Fred Winter from Father Christmas. He didn't know anything about racing. Came in for an interview and John was heavier then. He's been so on his diet ever since. He's as thin now as he was when he was race riding. And Fred looked at him and looked at his hands, looked at his feet, and he said, listen, son, you'll be wasting your time with big hands and big feet. You'll just grow into them. It'll be a waste of time. What's the lightest weight you can do? He said, well, I was 7 pound 3 ounces once, meaning when he was born. So Fred Winter said, we can do without any more funny effers here. He said, but I like you and I'll give you the job. So he did. So it took him a while, to get John out of the show jumping way. But that was his forte, or one of his fortes actually, through race riding. Always correct to defense, John. Never pulling, pushing. He was right when he got there. And that saved an awful lot of energy. But it took a while, and I'll go right through it to how I ended with him then, as Paul Kellaway had ended with me. We had finally, he'd come through the ranks and we had got to sharing the job. And we both had 80 or 90. I had 86 winners. He may have had 90 that season because he was riding for lots of other people. So was I. And we're called together. And Fred said, Richard, I want to have a long chat to you about your longevity. And so he said, come on up with me. Now, the lads that nobody liked, or the head lad didn't like, were all sweeping the yard. The lads that he did like were in the centrally heated tack room, cleaning the tack, and Fred taking me, the stable jockey, up onto leveling the muck hill, where all the muck had been shut. We used to level it out, you see. So there we are, standing up almost to our knees in poo. And he said, right, Richard, we're here quietly, no one listening now. What do you think about the future? He said, but bear in mind, you will have a job with me as long as you feel you're able. But obviously the good hurdlers, John will go on to ride them over fences because he's the future. So I said, well, I've been offered quite a few jobs, including the BBC. And for the second time with the BBC, they'd asked me 2 years earlier and I had 5 best horses in the country. So I wasn't going to do that. Anyway, this second time, I knew it would not come again. So I said, well, in that case, thank you very much. I'll retire and go and join the BBC. And we shook hands, standing up to our knees in muck. It was a marvelous exit. But one of my other jobs that I've been offered was to sell automated horse walkers. I don't know if you've seen them. They're circular. They can be 6 or 8. and they're in little cages, loose, and they walk around and then they'll turn and they're able to turn around and go the other way. It's a good way of warming horses up and cooling them down. And I'd been offered the franchise to sell them. They were made in Scandinavia and they weren't in the country, you see. I thought, wow, there's meat to be had here. So I called in on the Monday morning, having left him on the Saturday. And he said, oh, I didn't expect to see you so soon, Richard. What's up? I said, well, I've got this marvelous thing to aid your training. It's an automated horse walker. Well, he fell about laughing. He said, Richard, I've had 3,000 winners without the use of a horse walker. I think I'll stay as I am for a while. So I was so embarrassed. I picked up could I use the phone, picked up his office phone and rang the company and retired. And I never actually started, never sold one. And of course, they went on to be there everywhere. I mean, Jack Berry had 8 of them. When those little flat horses, you could train them on a horse walker nearly. You gallop them twice a week and walk them on the walk of the rest. So that was a big future that I messed up. But I wouldn't have been any good because I am very embarrassed about money and selling. Terrible. I mean, we the fee you offered me, I didn't even quote it. You didn't think about it. Sorry, joke.
You did pretty well with the BBC.
Yeah. But those days, Julian Wilson had established it and had made it into what it was. But Julian said to me when he asked me and I'd agreed to come, he said, I didn't want you. I must tell you, I didn't want you, but the powers that be in the head of sport did. So just get this straight. You are non-you and I am you. Meaning, I don't know if they still use that phrase these days, but non-you is, you're an uneducated oaf, but being you is up there, you see. So I knew where I stood from the start. And he said, you will be in the paddock talking about horses, because we used to do it from ages there, see everything in the paddock, talk about them, and you occasionally do a betting show if it happens. And but that's your position. Don't ever think you're going to get out of that position. Fine, it was a job. I'd got a 5-year contract. It was great. And so on we went. But Julian, his style, because he used to brill cream his hair, it was very white grey, but he brill creamed it to make it look dark when he went on air. And he never went out of our little pod where we were interviewing people, because he didn't want the wind to go and all his hair that he pushed back and come over his face. So he wouldn't go out. So I suddenly thought, well, not suddenly, I thought, this program needs livening up, you see. So I said to him, Jules, why don't you let me go out now and again? I'll go across and stand by the last fence. The access that people have now and have for years, tremendous. So he said, no, that's not how we work with the BBC. No, you stay where you are, you see. But anyway, he used to go away every January for 3 months because it was winter, or 2 months, a lot racing off, you see. He said, you can cut your teeth now. When I'm away, you can have the program, knowing damn well a lot of them would be off because of the weather, and he'd left strict orders for me not to go off wandering. Well, I did. I decided this is what we needed. And I started going out and about. People loved it. And a horse called, I don't know. I Am Grumpy was running. And I opened up the program and said, well, Julian may not be with us, but the horse that they've named after him is number 1 in the 330, Mr. Grumpy, or I'm Grumpy, I can't remember. Within minutes, the phone rang. I had a big in those days, I had a big battery. The mobile phone was on a battery, a car battery with a hand, you could hardly carry things. It rang. And Julian said, I may be in Barbados, but I know what you're up to. Put the phone down. So, Julian was a one-man show, and it ended because of that, because he would not change. And they brought Claire Balding in for an interview at Newbury as soon as she left uni, I suppose it was. And Claire did a duo with Julian, and for the day, she was brilliant. And it was evident that she was the future. So anyway, head of sport offered her the job, you see, and she turned it down. And they couldn't believe it. And she said, no, I saw that Richard was in his little stable doing Paddock. Peter Sullivan was a commentator, and Julian did everything else. She said, that's not for me. So off she went. She worked for Radio 5 Live and did everything, Olympics, everything. You know, she won us straight away. So they offered her the job probably 4 years later, I suppose, for a second time, and she accepted it. So Julian worked with her on a couple of meetings, and give him his due, you know, he helped her along. But it was so evident that she was the future that Julian then didn't renew his contract. He, again, was on 5-year contracts. He knew he could not compete with Claire. And he was right. You know, you'd have to be a blind man to see that. Because Claire was vivacious, young, wanted to get out, wanted to do things that we'd never done before. So BBC was a lovely thing. And look at all the pundits that are around, football and all the other things. If you've been in the sport, you know, up high, down low, you know the pitfalls. It's your way of prolonging your grasp on the sport. I mean, a lot of jockeys years ago in my day used to ride 2 or 3 years after they'd lost their nerve because they didn't know anything else, didn't want to give it up. But it becomes pretty evident, you know, and they have to eventually. So this was a great way of staying in the sport I loved.
Shot clocks, big shots, upsets, aces. TGL playoffs are here. First, Atlanta Drive starts their repeat run against Los Angeles Golf Club. Then, Rory's Boston Common Golf and Tiger's Jupiter Links face off in their playoff debuts. Who will advance? Keep up. It's playoffs. Tune in Tuesday, March 17th at 6:30 p.m. and 9 p.m. only on ESPN and the ESPN app.
Well, that was a very interesting interlude there, Richard. Let's get back to 1973.
Correct.
1973.
What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, 1973. To begin with, 3 days before the festival, you won the Imperial Cup on one of those 5 horses you were talking about, Lanzarote, carrying 12 stone 4.
I know. Amazing feat, wasn't it? Quite incredible. I think I actually won it on royal sanction as well, but that's irrelevant. Lanzarote came to us from Lord Howard de Walden, being a flat horse, okay flat horse, Stephen, but not a great flat horse, and big, good looking, couldn't jump to save its life. We schooled it and schooled it. It used to come through with its hind legs tucked under it, almost in front of its front legs, you know, like a crab. So Fred Winder said, we're going to shock him this morning. I said, oh, great. Will it shock me too? He said, probably. I said, what are we doing then? He said, I want you to jump the fence, steeplechase fence, instead of the hurdles. He said, it'll either make him respect jump him, or you and he'll end up doing a somersault. And I said, and up at Lambourne, there were 7 in a row fences joined, you know, with no, well, just wings, but actually joined, going from small, bigger, bigger, bigger. He said, take the biggest. We'll really see if this works. Anyway, he was so much better. And forevermore, he was schooled over fences. He never schooled over a hurdle again, and then won a champion hurdle. So, you know, that was really good thinking and bold. Of course, they have lots of loose schools now and things, but we didn't in those days.
And the festival, 1973, Fred had the favourites for the 4 biggest races in Pendle, Crisp, Killiney and Beulah. You didn't ride Beulah, but you rode the other 3.
I did ride Beulah one season, you know. I had 5, I rode him 6 times, 5 hurdle and 1 chase. But anyway, he wasn't my ride. He was Paul Kellaway's. And then I got him for the period before John was, you know, Paul Kellaway left, and therefore I got him. But anyway, yes, you imagine looking at those sort of horses, and it's not worrying, it's exciting. Now, Pendle was beaten in the Gold Cup a short head by the Dickler. And I'm my biggest critic. And when we get to Crisp in the National, I will open up there. So Pendle's odds on for the Gold Cup. We'd won the Arkle, good horse, but he had a kink. He didn't like being in front, even though places like Kempton, we'd win 20 lengths with him being in front for the last mile. But he was always, Stephen, curling up underneath me. And I'm having to, change my hands and growl at him and keep him going forward because he just didn't like being in front. So come the chat before the Gold Cup, I said to Fredwin, look, I would really like to come halfway up the run-in with this horse. That's how he'll be so impressive because he'll race to get to the horse in front of me. He'll go to the front. And then when he starts normal thing, pulling up underneath me, it'd be too late. We'd be past the winning post. He said, Richard, I've ridden in a lot of Gold Cups, won a few. He said, if you miss the last, you go and make a Horlicks of it, you'll never get back. So he said, I don't want you doing what you want to do. I want you to be in front, well in front by the last. And I did that. And when he jumped the last, the crowd went mad, both sides, the big grandstand and in the what we call the cabbage patch, the other side. And Pendle went, ooh, put his head up. And you could actually see it on the thing. He's curling up into himself. And I've tried to keep him going. The Dickler headed him by a length, and then he could get going. Then he would get going again. And I got back to the Dickler, but the short head, not far enough. And the next stride, he's a length in front. And I would die saying that day I should have come late, but you ride to orders, and so that another time Fred Winter will have had every reason to think that I on Crisp, and that was only 2 weeks after. You imagine being beaten in the Gold Cup a short head and then having to go to the National on a joint favourite, who's got top weight, giving stones away to everything, except Lescargo, a dual Gold Cup winner. So big emotional time. But do you want to carry on talking about Cheltenham?
Cheltenham first, yeah. All four of them were odds on, actually, Richard. On the Tuesday, you rode Crisp and Kalini. Crisp was first, and in the champion chase, he was 8-15, and he came third behind the American horse.
Can't remember it.
Inslinger.
Yeah, Inslinger, yeah. Crisp was an amazing horse. Big, strong, opposite to Pendle. Pendle was a little, calling him ratty is wrong, but Pendle had two horns, Stephen, which is very unusual. They were only about 3/4 inches long. And of course, we never clipped his head, so you couldn't see them distinctly. But I have got photographs sideways on. We can see the horns. And so did Royal Sanction, who won the Imperial Cup, had two horns, the only two I've ever ridden with them. But Pendle was a ratty little, lean little horse. Crisp, his chest was that deep, as tall as a man. He was strong, he was big, and he pulled very hard, and he worked very, very well. He was a good workhorse. So, he was always going to be good. But that was 2 miles. And that's what he'd been in Australia, running over 2 miles and winning easily over 2 miles. So the following year, I'll come back to Chris, but the following year, he ran in the Gold Cup, only finished 5th, jumped the last in front, and didn't quite finish. So Crisp, incredibly powerful, 2-miler, and a good horse. But to go from 2 miles at Cheltenham to 4.5 miles at Aintree, a very big ask. Can it happen? Also, because Fred Winder was a great discusser of plans, he said, Richard, I want you to drop this horse out. He's got 12 stone on his back, giving 2 stone away to good horses, chuck him in behind and follow them around and get him into cruise mode and let him get taken, sucked round, a bit like riding in a bicycle in behind a bus. It sucks you on, you see. So I said to him, I won't be able to hold him because I won't be able to keep him there because his jumping is so good. He was one of the rare horses, Stephen, that when he saw a fence, he would quicken of his own volition and ping it. You could never organize him. He did it. So I said, 40 runners in behind. Some of them go, oh, like at the first. I said, he'll jump on something's back. So he said, okay, I accept that. Go in front on the inside then and try and steady him down. You won't pull him back because he's so strong, but talk to him, when you land that first stride, just ease him back. So we got it all together. It nearly worked, but not quite. It was the most incredible race because for the first part of it, right down to Beech's first time, I'm on the inside and Grey Sombrero, Bill Schumacher, is on the wide outside where the fences were easier, but you're going much further. There are pretty sharp turns down at Beech's, Foynhaven and the Canal Turn. You can save a lot of ground going around the inner. So I'm there and I looked across, I could see Bill, but the others were just behind me, but I was never running away. A lot of people criticized saying you were run away with. No, I never was. I was nicely in my hands. Where he gained his ground was the quickening going in, a fairly low jump over, and galloping as he hit the floor. He loved it. Jumping is what he did. They called him the Black Kangaroo, and he was. So anyway, we went on round. I could still hear the rest. I'm still in touch, in front, but in touch. And when we got to the chair, big open ditch in front of it, and it's 5'3" high and 4'6" thick. The actual fence and the ditch was deep and starey. But the trick of this one, there used to be all traps and tricks, Aintree, not anymore. The ground on the landing side was raised 18 inches above the takeoff side. So Crisp's exuberant jump, and he skimmed through the top of it. The ground came up to meet him, and it made him shudder a bit, but that was fine. On we went. But that's where Grey Sombrero fell. And that left me 20 lengths clear. Jumped the water, and I couldn't hear another thing. Normally in the National, people are shouting and swearing and all sorts of things. So I went round the bend, got the whole course to go through again, couldn't hear another horse, and I thought, that'll do me. Keep saving a bit. Keep saving. As I say, people think I'm brainless, but I knew what I was doing at the time. Anyway, keep saving. But his jumping was quick. And it's not energy sapping. If you jump well, you're saving energy. They get a breath in the air, So he was fine. He was happy. Beech's, like a hurdle. Canal Turn, pull out, go across, jump the corner. Did everything I wanted. He was malleable. I could do what I wanted with him. Coming up, I could see the grandstand. It's still 3/4 mile away, but I could see the grandstand. I thought, yeah, a long way to go yet on a 2-miler. So keep saving. He jumped. Came over the Melling Road. I think there's 2 to jump there. Can't remember now. So anyway, got to the second last, still couldn't hear another horse. But he visibly weakened. His good striding legs started to go a bit spready at the front, and his ears were losing their strength too, big ears. So I was hoping we'd hang on because I still couldn't hear a horse. And then he went to the last and popped it, and then I could hear Red Rum. I didn't know what he was, but I could hear Red Rum. And I made the biggest riding error of my life, Stephen. I thought, well, I got to give him one. Fred Winter didn't like horses being hit. I said, I got to give him one and wake him up if I can. And I pulled my stick through and whacked him right-handed. and he went left-handed because he was big and he was in my hands. So you let go of the reins, they needed support. And I needed to go right-handed to go round the elbow. And he's gone left. So 2 strides, I got him back on, got him to the elbow, rode up there. But all the time I could hear Redrum, who was a high blower. When they exhale a high blow, their nostrils flap. So you can hear them coming. And Brian Fletcher was very, very clever because he knew if he came to me, my horse would quicken. So he pulled out wide, and he's probably, as he passed me, only 2 stride from the line as he passed me, he is 10 lengths further on out. That was a very clever move on Brian Fletcher's part. Anyway, so we come in. I am gutted, but only for about 100 yards. And by the time we're pulled up, and his lad, Chipper Chape, wouldn't even look at me, but he took us in, and we're coming through the crowds and everyone's cheering one thing and another. And I'm back on top. I've had, Stephen, the most fantastic ride. Money couldn't buy it. I had earned the right to be on Chris, and money could not buy it. So I'm elated when everyone else, the punters, Fred Winter, the owner, are all deflated, and there's me smiling like a clown, I suppose. Anyway, I got off, and again, the old pat the horse's rump, put his arm around me. He said, "Well, you did your best." He didn't say, but it wasn't good enough. He didn't need to, Anyway, we had a drink afterwards with Sir Chester Manifold, who bred the horse, came over from Australia, and we went in for a drink and commiseration and talk about the race. And Fred Winder said, "I told Sir Chester after you jumped the second last, we're beaten," because he could see the horse changing, you see, and got a lot of weight on his back. Redrum had 10 stone 5. So we're having a drink and discussing it, you see, but no one pilloried me, and they could have done, they could have actually scathed me, taken the skin off me. And as I was going to leave, Chester Manifold put an envelope in my pocket, said, "Here's a little something for you." I didn't open it till I got home. When I did, there was 1,000 quid in readies and a little note saying, "Thank you for the ride you gave the horse. Enjoy this." And there was 1,000 quid in 73. What was that worth? Crazy, isn't it? But you wanted to know what Fred Winder said. Nothing was said in the aftermath. And about 10 days later, we were going to Plumpton. Again, I've got some good horses going there. And I used to drive Fred in his car, and he'd go to sleep, you see. And I got that prickly feeling, that someone was looking at me, and there was only Fred in the car. So I looked down at him, and sure enough, there he was, asleep in there, but he'd got one eye open, and it was aimed at me. And he said, "Richard, you know where you lost that race, don't you?" Now, we'd been beaten on 4 or 5 favourites in between, so that race, didn't have to say what it was. I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, there's no point discussing it. It's gone now. You know where you went wrong. You won't make that mistake again." So a great man. Now, very few trainers would have taken that defeat like that.
So he was very loyal as well. You said that.
Terribly loyal. In the early days, when we started getting a lot of horses and there was terrible snow, we would put the mutt from the stables out in the paddock into a big ring. And that's how we exercised the horses. We couldn't get out on the roads. They were terrible. So we go round and round the manure ring, and it would get flattened down, and we'd put the next day's manure on it and get flattened down. And when the thaw came, Fred Winder said, or the head lads all said, "Right, boys, today we're going to clear that up. We'll get the trailer out there, and we'll all get out there with pitchforks, and we'll shove it, and then we'll clear the paddock up." But the head lad at the time was, and I won't mention him because he might still be around, had a favourite, a lad, very well educated, very dapper, nice guy, who was trying to get rides as well. He was called Red Weaver, And he went on to train a few afterwards, but Red was teacher's pet, you see. So we're out there in the freezing cold, and shucking muck up on the trailer. And he took Red, he said, you come with me, Red. And he took him into the tack room where it was centrally heated, you see. He said, you busy yourself in here while they're doing that. So a few of the boys who weren't going to get rides, weren't jockeys, weren't going to get rides, couldn't give a monkey. So, well, this isn't fair, everybody out, strike. And that means you jockeys. And they were pretty tough, some of those lads, waving a pitchfork at you, you're going to strike. So we all got off, stuck our forks in the ground, you see. Fred Winter heard about it from the head lad. And Fred came into the paddock, didn't say a word to anyone. There's all this grumpy lads like this, pitchforks there. Didn't say a word to us. Went up and picked up the first pitchfork near him and just didn't say anything, started putting the muck himself, you see. So slowly we all, and then everyone pitched in. It was a show of, look, boys, grow up. And if you can't do it, I will. That was his mantra, really. He was superb.
Good story. The other horse you rode at Cheltenham, who was the 8-15 favourite in the championship, the 3 Mile Novices Championship race, was Kalini, yeah. Won by 5 lengths.
Yeah. I got the ride on Kalini because we were sharing jobs, Paul Kellaway and me at the time. And Kellaway rode him his first bit of work. He'd come over from Ireland, his first bit of work, and he said, I don't want to ride this horse. He said, he's gone in the winds. I can hear a whistle. I don't want to ride him. So Fred said, well, it's all right, Richard will. And he went on. He was a good horse over hurdles. And then he went chasing. And he needed to have his mind made up. He needed to have his mind made up. Going to a fence, he'd be slightly lazy, but he was an exceptionally good jumper. And he won the RSA. Was it called the RSA in those days? Somewhere, it doesn't matter. It was the Novices Gold Cup, wasn't it? So jumped like a train. Never heard another horse. What have we got on our hands? And we roughed him off then. We'd finished him. He was being led out for a pick of grass in the mornings. And then Fred Winter, or maybe the owner, I don't know, saw there was a race at Ascot 2 weeks later, might have been 3 weeks.
It's April the 7th, I looked up, yeah.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, so it's a week after the Grand National.
Was it? Right, yeah. Okay. Well, he hadn't done any work between the National and then. They decided to run him. They weren't going to run him, and then they decided to. And Fred said to me, look, he might be a bit stuffy. We haven't worked him. So just keep hold of his head and make the running, you'll win. It was a £5,000 race, which, is small now, but in the time was nice. And going away from the grandstands, going down the hill at the second one, which I think is a ditch, he's going into it. And I've asked him, grabbed him and asked him to lengthen and pick up at the ditch. And he did. And then changed his mind, Stephen. He was in midair and he changed his mind and put his legs down. Well, being an open ditch, he's gone into the front of the fence and it's double somersaulted. And I was knocked out. And I thought I saw him galloping off. So when I came round and I'm in the ambulance room on a little truckle bed, there, blankets over me, and have a drink of this, and he's come round, and it'll only be time, and one thing and another. The owner came in, Mrs. Boucher, and it was her first horse, just won at Cheltenham Festival, and she said, "Oh, how are you, Richard?" I said, "Well, I'm naturally disappointed, but I'm glad the horse got up and galloped away." She went silent. She said, "Oh, don't you know?" I said, no what? She said, he broke his shoulder. He's had to be destroyed. Well, I burst out crying. I'd just been knocked out and out for some time, and I'm come round and then been given this news. I couldn't control myself. and I'm crying. And she picked me up by one hand, Stephen, by the colours, went and said, how can I carry on having horses if you fall apart like this, you see? And off she went. But she was so distressed about it afterwards. She was so, but it was like me crying, her getting her anger out, was part of the whole. She just lost her best horse. Money could not have bought that horse. He was a good horse. Could have been a Gold Cup horse quite easily.
Can you remember how Fred was after the race?
Yeah. Relax would be the wrong word. He said, this is a crying shame, Richard, after the Gold Cup, we don't need this sort. And the National, it's been a pretty bad 3 weeks, but we can't do anything about it. You rode him. He answered your question and then decided to put down. He said, you did nothing wrong, which he was brilliant at analysing things like that.
What was your own personal highlight riding for Fred? Is it the crisp race, although you lost, or is it Lanzarotte's Champion Hurdle?
No, Lanzarotte's Champion Hurdle. I'm proud of that because I won it on using my brain. Comedy of Errors was a better horse before and after the 74 Champion Hurdle. And I thought there's only one way to beat him is to put him under pressure, because he had a tendency, he was very rarely under pressure, but when he was, to just drift off right-handed. Cheltenham, left-handed course. So we discussed this beforehand, and Fred Winder put in a pacemaker, Calzado, and he was ridden by the Honourable Stephen Stanhope, the second son of the Earl of Harrington, who was assistant trainer at the time. And he said, right, okay, this is what we're going to do, Stephen. You're going to go fast and make this a real stamina race. And Richard, you're going to tuck in. And when you want to attack Comedy of Errors, go and give it to him, you see. Calzado only went one hurdle in front, and then he wasn't fast enough, and the whole lot went past him. So I had to make my mind up quickly. What do we do now? Now, our plan was to put him under pressure. So if we dawdle around like this, he'll never be under pressure. So I kicked on from the second or third hurdle. Now, that's a long way to commit yourself, Stephen. I had to go 3/4 of one lap and then another whole lap in front, committed. I am there, a bullseye to be shot at. But coming down the hill, Comedy of Errors came nearly up with me, and twice he jumped out right-handed, and I was able to hug the rail and come round, and he was fairly close to me at the last. But I had gained breathing time, you see, while he was doing that, and I got the running rail, getting a breath into a horse, and we won the race. And I will die saying, okay, look, I hold my hands up for all the stupid things I did, but that was one that I actually worked out, and it worked. So, he wasn't a natural. He did run over fences eventually, and John Franklin rode him, and he had to be put down at Cheltenham. He was fatally injured. It was a shame, but he just wasn't a natural.
So where does Fred rank as a jockey and as a trainer? He's the only man to ride and train the winner of the Champion Hurdle, the Gold Cup, and the Grand National. Yeah,
but that in itself is just amazing. But more than that, it was what he did. I can't remember how many times he was champion jockey, but he was
4 times champion jockey and 8 times champion trainer.
Yeah. But as a jockey, he was really, really admired by everyone else and looked up to, because he was a man of steel. He didn't talk just for the sake of talking, but he wasn't dull. He used to, as a rider, he used to go on holiday with Dave Dick. Dave was a great big fellow, big old hook nose, and big rough old fella. And they used to take 2 months off. In those days, we had 2 months holiday, you see, the season, between the season. They'd just go to Spain or Madeira or somewhere, and they wouldn't come back until they run out of money. It's quite a, he really did have a good time. But when it came to riding or training, he was very well, strict would be the wrong word, but he knew what he wanted and would ask us to do what he wanted.
But you owe a great debt to him. You must be very pleased that you contacted him in, what, 1964?
It took a while because we had quite a few lads in the yard who had come there with pretensions of riding, had license and things. And it took a while to get going. Remember, I've had 4 seasons riding, no winners. I joined Fred Winter, and my winners went 1 in the first season, 3 in the second season, and 7 in the third. So in 7 years of my riding, I'd only ridden whatever that was, 11 winners, pathetic. And then I had earned my spurs by then, and he started putting me on good horses. And as he said, they jumped well for me. And I got the rewards. But had he not taken me on, how long would I have lasted? Having had a winner, I'd have probably lasted another 2 seasons somewhere else and disappeared, God knows where. You've got to be in the right place at the right time. But the only pat on the back I worked it out that if there was a man who could help me, it would be him. And he did.
So probably the most important person in your life, I would say.
Well, hang on, the wife's just out there. I can't be saying things like that, can I? But I loved working for him. Great man. He was a gentleman and a scholar. Good man.
And Cheltenham 2026, will you be going?
Just on Champion Hurdle Day. Look, 83, traffic, getting in, getting out. People still remember me riding. Oh, come and have a glass of champers, and so just one day is enough for me. I'm invited by some American friends who we bought horses for years, and I could go whatever days, but the one is enough. Champion Hurdle Day is enough. And it's a good.
Charlie Fenwick be coming over?
Hasn't decided, but he often does. And again, he is involved in the same guys I am who have the box. They have quite a few horses around. They're called, and they sponsor the Brown Advisory Group. They sponsor Chase. I think it's Thursday. And Charlie Knoll has lots of horses under Mirabelle banner in the States and here. They've got 5 with Willie Mullins, including Charlie Fenwick in them, 5 with Willie Mullins, and all over the place. The Richard Hannon on the flat, and they really do get involved, as well as having a lot of horses over in the States. But lovely. I mean, fellows who could buy Oxford come and might have the elbows out of their Barber jacket. It's great. They're lovely human beings.
But as someone who was born in Cheltenham, what does Cheltenham mean to you?
Well, I really live for Cheltenham, but you get a great view on the television. You see everything. So I don't feel I'm missing out. I've been there since I was 17. So, it's fine now. One day's enough. But Cheltenham is everything. I was born only maybe 3/4 of a mile from the racecourse, and I used to play truant at school every Cheltenham meeting, and my mother didn't know. I'd go out in my short trousers and a sack with my books in and my lunch, and I'd walk up the road and get in the hollow of a tree up there, a nice hollow tree, and hang up my school clothes and get out my racing clothes, which were a much better pair of jeans, and take my lunch and go across the fields and the railway and position myself at the top of the hill as they just swoop to come down and watch all the action from there. It was marvelous, absolutely superb thing to do. And to hear a field of 20 horses coming towards you, the thunder, it never quite captures it on television, but the thunder of those hooves And the shouting of the jocks, it's great. I loved it. So to go and ride a few winners there was good.
Thank you very much, Richard, again for being on the Paddock and the Pavilion, remembering your friend and boss, the legendary Fred Winter.
He was my hero.
At Sports Social Podcast Network, we know you love great sports podcasts. That is why you're listening to this show. But do you also make a great sports podcast? Sports Social Podcast Network has teamed up with the Charles Tyrwhitt Sports Book Awards to launch a brand new awards category, Sports Podcast of the Year. From sharp analysis to documentary storytelling to the biggest voices in sport, we're looking to honour the shows that shape conversation, connect with audiences and showcase creativity, storytelling and production. You have until March 31st to enter, and full details can be found at sportsbookawards.com.